But there's a great book that I highly recommend called The Happiness Advantage by, I believe it's Sean Acor. And it talks about how many of us fall into this same trap of thinking that if I achieve this now, this promotion, or make this amount of money, or have this or that, then I'll be happy. And it's so amazing that he shifts that on its head. He talks about how the research says quite the opposite. If we're happy now, we're actually more likely to achieve the thing that we wish to achieve.
I'm Garrett Salpeter, and I believe that the most powerful and transformative way to help people recover from pain and injury, heal from trauma, and reach their highest levels of fitness and performance is to focus on the nervous system. In this podcast, we'll share knowledge from the frontiers of neuroscience and inspirational stories of how applying that knowledge has empowered people from all walks of life to heal, adapt, and grow.
Hello, NeuFit Nation. Welcome back to the Undercurrent Podcast. This is the first episode that I am recording in my 40s. I just turned 40, and that is actually the theme of today's episode because it certainly feels like a milestone. It has caused me to stop and reflect, and I'm going to share some of those reflections with you here today. In the recent years, I've gone through periods of transition in business, in life. My kids have hit new milestones. This year, my older daughter started high school. I've also gone through some personal transitions with a separation and divorce, and all of this has caused me, especially in combination with a significant birthday like this, caused me to look up from the day-to-day and ask some bigger questions. And I wonder if I'm living my life in the way that I wish to be living my life. I look at and I think about how I'm responsible for what has happened and is happening in my life. The one that immediately led to this episode, I also thought about and asked myself, what ideas and principles have influenced me and actually changed the way that I live? And when I sat with that question, there's 4 principles that rose above the rest. So I was, as you can imagine, I was very excited to see that having 4 corresponds well with a 40th birthday. I'm glad the numbers work out. I also saw a common thread and realized that they're not necessarily 4 separate lessons, but that they build on each other. And there's almost a sequence that for me is like a manual for how to live. And that is what I want to share with you today. And before I get into that, a couple notes. One is that if you're familiar with me, with our work at NeuFit, you know that for nearly 20 years now, for me, it's all come back to one thing, which is the nervous system. And when we're talking about the NeuFit method and the newbie, it all comes down to helping people retrain their nervous system. It's the operating system of the body. We want the whole system to be running better. And in reflection on these, I see how I've been doing the same type of thing with myself, trying to get my operating system to work better. And one of the biggest things that, as you know, the nervous system does, it's to make us aware of our internal and external environments. And so awareness is a thread that also ties together these 4 lessons that I'm going to share with you, because each one of them is preceded by or begins with awareness, with noticing where I am or I'm not in alignment, noticing what my habits are and how they're influencing my life, noticing what I'm accepting or tolerating in my life, and also noticing for me areas in which I've been postponing my life and waiting for something to happen so I could achieve something and then feel a certain way, things like that I'll get into here. So these are the 4, I don't necessarily want to say lessons, but I'd say the 4 biggest shifts in how I've lived that really stand out to me as being very impactful. And my intention here in sharing them with you is that they'll also be worthwhile to you in some way. So on to the first shift. For me, it's all about alignment. This is number 1. I'm choosing to share this first because I feel like alignment has been the biggest unlock for me, in the sense that finding where I feel aligned or where I haven't felt aligned, and how the decisions I made from that, I can see how things play out. And one of the first times where I really realized the dark side of this, of acting out of alignment, was an issue with a person I had worked with, and I knew deep down inside that there wasn't alignment. It wasn't a good cultural fit. and I overrode that, in part because of people pleasing tendencies, because it was difficult for me to have hard conversations and let this person know what was problematic, what was not working, what needed to change, difficulty for me setting boundaries. And I also had this was very early on in my career, also had this sort of scarcity mindset as opposed to abundance mindset of like, gosh, can I ever find anyone else to work with me? So there's this feeling of not being worthy, not being good enough. Noticing these things certainly all influenced it. But in overriding that, I allowed to continue situations and dynamics that ended up costing far more in the long run, emotionally and monetarily, costing a lot more than the initial pain and cost, or the immediate pain and cost would have been having a hard conversation up front or getting rid of a person, who wasn't a good fit, years ahead of when I finally found the courage and clarity to do it. And when I look at other times where I've made decisions that have come out of alignment, like for example, coming out of college, I had a physics undergraduate degree, and I was set to go to engineering graduate school at the University of Texas here in Austin, which is how I got down here. And it was a fabulous experience, and I'm so glad I did it. And I had options to take jobs. I had a job offer with a big consulting firm out of college. I had an opportunity to interview with a large, very well-known investment bank, which I may or may not have gotten a job, but I decided that I wanted to pursue this because it felt more aligned with who I was and what I was interested in doing. And that ended up being a great decision. And that engineering background ultimately gave me the experience and the perspective to be able to lead the team that ultimately created the NeuFit device and do the things that I'm doing now. It was a big part of that journey. So I'm so glad that I did it. Also, early on in my career, back when I was working in a clinic and I had this 120 square foot office in the chiropractic clinic of the guy who was the UT Longhorns chiropractor, his private practice. I was using older versions of electrical stimulation. That's part of what led me to ultimately creating the NeuFit. And I, very young doing this, it wasn't sure. No one was really sure where this was going to go. Me most of all. But I knew that I really wanted to do it. And there was a moment there when Brianna and I, my former wife, got pregnant with our first daughter. And I was still in my early 20s, and I was honestly scared. And there were some suggestions, like my father, for example, very reasonably and lovingly encouraged me to take my master's degree in engineering and go get a stable job so I can provide for my family. And I understand and appreciate why he said that. And for me, I sat with that and realized that what I really wanted to do was to follow my heart and pursue this work, doing this clinic and this type of work that led to NeuFit and everything that we're doing now. And I'm so glad I did it. And it came from alignment. So those are some examples of acting from alignment or overriding the internal knowing and acting from a place of misalignment. So to me, that really is the foundational framework. And a big catalyst for me understanding this has been my experience in meditation over the last couple of years. I probably first got interested in meditation from listening to and reading Sam Harris's work and conversations with my friend Wesley Kress, who's been on this podcast, and hearing his experiences and his explanations of meditation really helped it resonate with me in a way that it got me interested in pursuing it. And I've done more formal work both with Shauna Shapiro and Corey Muscara. Shauna's been on the podcast as well. And I highly recommend both of their books and their online work and courses, or in-person work and courses, because for me, meditation has been the way to really clarify and crystallize this concept, or operationalize this and bring it into my daily life, where a lot of times we think that meditation is about sitting still until we get to a place of bliss or happiness where nothing bothers us. But what it's really about, as I've learned from people like Corey and Shauna, what it's really about is being still enough so that we can be aware enough, or mindfulness, right? Mindful enough to be aware of what's going on in our own experience so that I can actually feel when something I'm contemplating doing is aligned or is not aligned. And the framework that I really love here that I have started using whenever I can is understanding when I'm making a decision from a place of self or parts, using the language of internal family systems. Another great book recommendation is No Bad Parts by Dick Schwartz. That describes this concept of internal family systems. When I'm making decisions from my true self, which you have a true self, I have a true self, we all have this true self, this place within us that is our deepest truth, where we feel clear and calm and confident and courageous and creative and connected. There's these different C words that describe this state. Even just hearing those, you may feel some energy resonating. And the parts are the different patterns within ourselves that I alluded to earlier in my own experience, where I learned to act a certain way, in people pleasing, difficulty setting boundaries. I also learned that I felt like I had to achieve something in order to be worthy of love. And so these are the patterns. These patterns are parts of me, and different parts can be online at different times, and they can interact in certain ways. And I can be acting from certain parts or acting from self, those different places. And so meditation for me allows me to have the opportunity to slow down enough, to drop in deeply enough to get clear on what is my true motivation for doing something and making a decision. Is it aligned? Is it coming from a place of self, or is it coming from a place of parts? And so the question I really love to ask myself, which I got from Corey Muscara in his teaching, is, am I considering doing this thing because I already feel complete as a person and it's aligned with my true desires? Or am I feeling empty inside and I'm choosing this thing as an attempt to grasp at something that might fill me up? Because we all know that getting past a certain point, at least getting more money or getting a nicer house or a nicer watch or a nicer car, we feel like that's gonna be the thing that finally gets us happy. And we know that it doesn't work that way. But there's these patterns that I even will notice sometimes that I fall into, and it's the kind of underlying awareness of this alignment dynamic that helps me navigate this. And there's a few examples where I've seen my ego, that part, many examples where I've seen that. I was just reflecting in preparation for this. Like one, for example, doing what I do for work, I admittedly take a lot of pride in helping people get results in sports medicine and rehabilitation and things like that. And with myself, I put off for many years getting a hip surgery that I likely should have gotten earlier, and that I finally did get, and that was helpful. I got bone spurs shaved down off the neck of my femur, where I had a femoral acetabular impingement, FAI, and I'm so glad I did it, but I put it off for a long time. I also noticed, really interesting, after my first meditation retreat, as you likely can tell, I've read a ton of books, and I think a lot of the where I am and what I've learned and who I've become is positively influenced by the books that I've read. And so I think that's wonderful. And I also, at the same time, observed that a lot of that came from a place of feeling somewhat empty or incomplete, and thinking that if I was just a little bit smarter, if I knew a little bit more, then I'd be better. Then I'd finally be worthy of some sort of status or love or belonging, some sort of internal drive like that. And I learned that some of that consumption of books, podcasts, etc., was some of that grasping, trying to fill me up inside. And it was so interesting that after my first meditation retreat with Corey Muscara, for a couple months, I noticed that desire was significantly diminished. Where I, instead of always wanting to listen to a podcast or a book on tape, audio book when I'm in the car, book on tape, they don't, not on tape anymore, but when I noticed that I would actually just enjoy sort of doing a breathing exercise or sitting and listening to music, things like that. It was an interesting shift. And so now I still read, and I ask myself if I'm doing it from some sort of compulsive desire to fill a perceived void, or if I'm doing it from a place of true interest and alignment. And it often is from a place of interest and alignment. But I really like that framework, and I felt compelled to share that with you. So I think the big question that I would ask, and that I encourage everyone listening to this to ask, is, it's not necessarily about following your passion, but following your alignments. So I would ask you if what you're contemplating doing is truly aligned. And one exercise that I have done in the past is actually close my eyes and consider a path A, consider a path B, and see how they feel in my nervous system, because that often will give us a clue. It'll, sometimes it's as dramatic as one path will feel very constricting energetically, and one will feel expansive, like it's giving us energy. And that's one thing that I've found, is that if I'm doing things that could be objectively hard, even if it is hard, it feels somewhat easier to me, because that sense of alignment gives me energy, and it doesn't feel as hard. It makes having going through difficult times in business, or having a workout program sustainable. So I would ask myself, and encourage you to ask yourself, where in my life am I choosing from emptiness rather than from fullness? Whatever that means to you. So that's the first one is understanding alignment. And we really have to understand our identity, our true selves, who we are, what is most important to us, what we value, what is in alignment with us at that deepest level. And then this second shift principle that I want to share is how our identity is built through repetitions, how we are a culmination of our habits. And I think a lot about my life as an ongoing experiment. I think about my inputs that I do in my training and lifestyle, in my business, how I show up with my family, and what I do with my kids. And I look at the results that come out of that. Think about it as sort of one big ongoing experiment. There's also this great quote attributed to Aristotle of, "We are what we repeatedly do." He talks about excellence is not an act, but it's a habit, because what we repeatedly do adds up to who we are. And so I think also in this sort of scientific ongoing experiment, results are feedback. They're not necessarily judgment. We don't fail, we gather information. I think that's a good mindset shift. I also think a lot about this in terms of fitness and health, which I think is a great metaphor for anything, because in fitness there is this balance of work and recovery and rest and regeneration. There's this balance of delayed gratification, of having to work for a period of time to see a result that comes later, of having to have faith in the process, of getting help and support and coaching and learning and finding the most effective way, not the shortcut, but the most effective and direct path to your goal. So there's all these different lessons that I think extrapolate beautifully to all areas of life. And I think a lot about the way that what I do every day, how to have a daily routine that helps me get to the levels of health and fitness and physical and mental performance and vitality that I wish to achieve for myself. So one thing that I'm working on is I'm generally very stiff. I have a background of ice hockey. As Gray Cook says, I was one of these examples of someone building fitness on top of dysfunction. I didn't have my core movement fundamentals down, and yet I built a fair amount of size and strength and speed on top of that. And so couple that with playing ice hockey and being locked in that kind of half squat position with hips and external rotation, very little foot and ankle movement because the feet are locked in boots, ice hockey boots, the skates, and all that leads to significant mobility restrictions that now I want to work on. And so I think about how my habits influence that. And there's things that I do to work on hip internal rotation, and I do those 6 or 7 days a week. I work it into my plan, and over time it's been so cool to see my hip internal rotation go from generously 0 degrees to 15, 20 degrees. It's still not anatomically ideal, but it's gotten a lot better, and it's cool to see the progress even in something that's as slow to change as structural remodeling of joint capsules. And I think this is a great prompt for us all to look at our habits. If someone, also going back to fitness, there's a great quote that the body you have is the body you've earned. So how, if we're not as strong in a certain area, or we're several pounds overweight, or there's likely some reason for it, and it's sometimes not the individual's fault. Sometimes there's toxic exposure or things like that that's out of their control, that's causing more inflammation, that throws things off, or some disease state. And oftentimes, once we know about it, then there's things that we can do about it.
Thank you so much for listening to the Undercurrent podcast. If you're interested in learning more about how NeuFit and the newbie can impact your life, please visit our website at www.new.fit. That's NEU.fit. So you can learn more about how it might integrate into your professional practice, how you can use it as a patient, and you can also connect with our team there.
So there's certainly I think a lot of value in understanding that our life now is the culmination of our habits, and really examining and evaluating those and making sure that, yes, they are aligned. So we have number one being alignment, number two being habits, repetition, how that builds upon and cements our identity. And then related is number three, which is the standards. There's this great saying that we get what we tolerate. There's our standards really shape our lives. And so for me right now, I actually, just keeping on the fitness metaphor, one of my standards is being able to sprint all out. And I'm dealing with an Achilles injury that is very frustrating to me, because I'm currently not able to meet my own standard. And because I take that standard seriously, it creates within me a sense of urgency where I'm rehabbing my Achilles very diligently. And it's difficult for me to be patient and understand that it can take several months for tendon tissue to remodel. And that's actually the subject of what will probably be the next podcast we release. A little bit of a foreshadowing there on Achilles tendon injuries and recovery from surgery and that whole topic. That's something that I'm diving into, trying to really learn as much about as I can, both out of interest and a desire to share it, and this personal desire to get back to my standard, where by the end of this summer, I intend to be able to get back to at least my weekly sprinting. So that's something that I think a lot about, and that is very important to me in terms of what we tolerate there. That's both within ourselves, and it's with the people that work within our businesses. It's within family members and friends and things like that. It's sort of this, not just what we do on our best day or when we hit our stretch goal, but it's what do we tolerate on the floor on the lowest day. And it's important in business. We're not going to hit our stretch goal every week, every month, every quarter, every year. But if there's a minimum number of calls that we're going to make, or if there's a minimum number of some effort that we're going to make, if we hold ourselves to that, chances are we're going to be better over time. Same thing in the gym. If you're not going to set a PR every day, but if you're going to continue working and getting better and following the program, that often leads to a great place in the long term. For me, one standard is my bedtime. I will occasionally stay out late for a special event or something like that if I really feel like, and this plays into number 4, where I'm focusing on, yes, delayed gratification is important, but I don't want to delay everything for a someday that may never come. So every once in a while I'll do this, but generally speaking, I'm very diligent about my bedtime because I know that if I don't go to bed on time, I'm not going to be as effective the next day. It's going to throw off different aspects of my vitality and energy and mental and physical ability. And so if I have something to do, one, being more strict with my bedtime, it forces me to prioritize getting shit done during the day, pardon my language. And it also, it makes it clear for me that if I have something that I need to work on, I will choose to go to bed earlier and then get up earlier and work on it in the morning rather than stay up and do it that night, because I know that the outcome is going to be better if I go to bed now and get up and do it in the morning in many ways. So there's a lot of ways that affects me, and that's one that's important for me. For some people, it's a minimum number of pages that they're going to read in a book per day, or whatever it might be. People have a devotional, or they just want to read different things, or meditation. For me, I think about the minimum number of minutes per day or days per year that I'm going to meditate. But the standards that we hold ourselves to apply everywhere, in health and recovery, in relationships, in our self-talk, in our environment, in our finances, in our businesses. And the standards that I, as a leader, accept from myself become the standards that our team accepts too. So especially for those of you who are leading teams and businesses, or leading within your family and home life, this is very important as well. So I think it's best summed up in that the quote that I've heard many places. I don't know where it originally came from, but we don't get what we want, we get what we tolerate. So I encourage you to ask what you, and I'll ask myself, what have I quietly or not so quietly started to tolerate that I never used to, or that is not in alignment with who I wish to be and how I wish to live my life, and how I wish my business to be and how I wish my family to be, etc. And that segues into the fourth shift. And this is, if we talk about alignment with our identity, we talk about reinforcing that identity in number 2 through our habits. We talk about preserving that through the standards and what we're willing to accept. Number 4 is about rounding out that identity, because I know that I was, especially in the early NeuFit years, I was very much in this trap of optimizing everything for later, putting off most of everything now, thinking that once this business grows, once I achieve a certain level of success, then I'll be able to enjoy my life, then I'll be happy, then this, then that. So it's this notion of journey over destination, process over outcome, or something like that. So I want to also frame this up as a continuum, because on one hand, there's what I just described. There's entirely putting off the future, entirely delayed gratification, and not enjoying anything right now. And then on the other end, there's like total nihilism, or not caring about later, and just enjoying today and not planning for the future at all. And so what I'm proposing, where I've settled on this balance for myself, and it can be personal for everybody, where I've settled on this is somewhere in between, where I do work hard now for where that will bring our business and my family in the future. I work hard now for where that will bring my health in the future, right? I want to be healthy and vital in my next decade, and the decade after that, and the decade after that, which, God willing, I will live to see. And I want to strike that balancing act. But there's a great book that I highly recommend called The Happiness Advantage by I believe it's Sean Acor, and it talks about how many of us fall into this same trap of thinking that if I achieve this now, this promotion, or make this amount of money, or have this or that, then I'll be happy. And it's so amazing that he shifts that on its head. He talks about how the research says quite the opposite. How if we're happy now, we're actually more likely to achieve the thing that we wish to achieve. Because generally speaking, happiness makes people healthier, more resistant to getting sick, more effective, more creative, gives them more energy, more health and vitality. And that, of course, makes it more likely that they will achieve the thing that they're setting out to achieve, assuming it is, back to number 1, assuming it is aligned with their true selves and deepest desires and all that. And so for me, this has really manifested in a couple ways. It's something that I read about, and I was aware of this notion, and it just sort of gradually hit me that I was putting off so much of my life for later. And so I finally just somehow, some way crossed over that threshold where I realized that I do need to make time to enjoy life now along the way, even as I'm practicing delayed gratification in certain important areas. And so taking my kids several years ago on a trip to Spain over the summer for a week and a half was an amazing memory. Taking them this year to Disney World, creating these memories while my kids are still young enough to make these memories. There's a great concept of memory dividends. I forget I think I first heard about this from the guy who wrote Die with Zero. Gosh, I can see his face. I forget his name now. He's here in Austin. Cool, really cool guy. And he talks about this notion of die with zero being that if we accumulate all this money, we should actually enjoy it in this life. You should give it away because that will create joy. We should also invest in experiences because it creates these memory dividends. Having the memories from these different trips with my kids is worth so much more. I'm getting a return on that investment more than if it was sitting in an account earning interest somewhere. Also, for me, I joined EO and a forum. EO is Entrepreneurs Organization, similar to YPO if you're familiar with that. And it's all founders, all business owners. And so I'm in this forum with anywhere from 7 to 9 other guys, and we do these adventure trips every year. And that was something that I realized along the way that I was putting off for later, the idea of having friendships and social relationships. And I finally realized, you know what, I would like to have more of that in my life now. I would like to prioritize and make some time for that. And we've done these amazing adventure trips. We've gone hiking 20 miles through the Narrows in Zion National Park, and kayaking and fishing in the San Juan Islands between Seattle and Vancouver. And just this year, camping and fishing and hiking in Colorado along the Gunnison River. It's my first time. I was kind of a city kid, so these trips allowed me to go camping for the first time in my life, which was amazing. And so I encourage you to consider what this right balance is for you. Again, it's very individual. Consider where you fall along that spectrum, and if it falls into wanting to play more golf now rather than waiting until you're retired, give me a call and play a round of golf. So again, it's not about like being anti-discipline or being reckless. There are areas where we still have to sacrifice. It is a balancing act, and I think there's this sense that success should expand our lives, not necessarily postpone it. So I will ask you, what are you postponing in your life that you actually could start living now? And as we wrap this up here, I will end where I started with talking about turning 40. And when I was younger, I was so focused on life and on focusing my life on becoming successful, whatever that meant at the time. And I really believed that if I just worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, delayed enough, that everything else, the happiness, relationships with life, would all sort itself out later. Now, I'm grateful that younger version of me put so much time and effort into learning and building the early stages of NeuFit and all of that. And now I'm grateful for the added perspective and experience too, where I realize that it's not just about becoming more accomplished and achieving more. It's also about alignment. And when I think about alignment, that actually helps produce more success than some of the other tactics and strategies and mindsets too. So it's interesting how these four can also interact as well. And again, this was not necessarily a dramatic overhaul, but it came from noticing, from awareness. And so I hope that you can have some sort of practice, and perhaps you already do, that has been as meaningful to me as this meditation practice in becoming aware of these different dynamics in my own life. And in closing, I'd like to leave you with one small challenge. Pick one of these four that hit you the hardest, whether it be focusing on alignment, your habits, your standards and what you tolerate, or balancing work now, sacrificing now for something later. Figure out which of those four hit you the hardest. And this week, ask yourself the question, where are you choosing from empty instead of full? What are your daily inputs building you into? What have you started to tolerate that you no longer intend to tolerate? Or finally, what are you putting off that you feel like deep inside you really would be better served by doing now. So I really appreciate you spending this time with me. If this one resonated, I'd love to hear your comments on social media or direct message, anything like that. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Undercurrent Podcast.